Now, everyone agrees that if you accept the concept of Naskh, everyone who accepts it agrees that the Qur'an can abrogate the Qur'an, and they also agree that the Sunnah can abrogate the Sunnah. As for Qur'an by being abrogated by the Sunnah, there's a bit of difficulty with that. First of all, because the Qur'an is mutawatir, and there's very, very little in the Sunnah which is mutawatir. And so that which is stronger cannot be abrogated by that which is weaker. You have some cases that have been brought as indications of abrogation of the Qur'an by the Sunnah. In Surah Al-Baqarah, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمْ الْمَوْتُ إِنْ تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةُ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا الْمُتَّقِينَ. It is prescribed for you when death approaches one of you, if he leaves wealth, that he bequeath to parents and near relatives in kindness, bil-ma'ruf, that's one way of translating it. This is a duty for all those who ward off evil. Verse 180. Okay, then you have a statement from the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ أَعْطَى كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقَّهُ أَلَا لَا وَصِيَّةَ لِوَارِثٍ. Allah has given everyone their due right to the inheritance, so there's no bequest allowed for an heir. However, the response to that is that the verses in Surah An-Nisa, when the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah has given everyone their right, that was the verses in Surah An-Nisa. So they're what abrogated this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, and the hadith is only making that explicit. And then you have this verse about prohibition of certain kinds of food, that there's nothing else prohibited except them. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 145, say, I find nothing in that which was revealed to me that is prohibited to an eater that he may eat thereof, except for carrion, blood poured forth, or swine flesh. For that verily is foul, or the abomination which is slaughtered in the name of other than Allah. Okay, so now you have hadiths that indicate that animals with predatory animals with fangs and birds of prey with claws, that their flesh is prohibited. So some scholars said, well, the prohibition there indicates that it's makruh to eat them by combining the hadith with the verse. There's other complicated explanations for them. The majority of scholars consider the hadith to indicate prohibition. If you look at Shafi'i, he said that this verse refers to, it's in the context of a dispute with the mushriks, and it's as if Allah is saying to them, everything that you consider to be halal is actually haram, and vice versa. Then there's another way of dealing with it, which is that all it's stating is that at the time that this verse was revealed, which was in Mecca, that this is what he had been informed of as being prohibited, and that later information came in Medina. And that so that it wasn't prohibiting, it wasn't abrogating the verse, but it was indicating that something else had been added to the sphere of the prohibited. And then the prohibition of marrying a woman and her aunt simultaneously. Verse 23 in Surah An-Nisa mentions various groups of people, types of women that a man cannot marry, including your mothers, your daughters, etc. And then, and the verse finishes with the mention of marrying two sisters simultaneously. And then verse 24 goes on to say, anything besides that is lawful for you. And then you have this statement by the Prophet ﷺ that it's not lawful to marry a woman and her aunt simultaneously, to be married to the two of them at the same time. Although this hadith has reached the books of the Sunnah in an ahad fashion, scholars say that the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ made that statement at the Hajj. So there was 100,000 Sahaba there to witness it, and it was because it was so well known among the Sahaba that the rule is agreed upon, and because it was so well known. Now, can the Sunnah be abrogated by the Qur'an? Well, that whole issue of the Qibla indicates yes. And you also have the fasting in Ashura that was originally, when they first moved to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ instructed them that fasting on the day of Ashura was obligatory. And then when the fasting of Ramadan came, then it abrogated that sunnah. Now, Imam Shafi'i, he says that's not the way this worked, that that the Qur'an didn't actually abrogate the sunnah, that this verse came about the Qibla, and then the Prophet ﷺ informed the Sahaba, and then when he stated it, then his sunnah abrogated the former sunnah. He was doing all of that to avoid the whole idea that there are certain very general verses in the Qur'an that about وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. Allah has made trade, buying and selling, He's made that lawful, and He has prohibited riba. So, since that's a blanket statement that He has made trade lawful, there are various statements in the Sunnah which prohibit certain types of trade. So Shafi'i wanted to avoid anybody using that verse to say, wait a minute, all these prohibitions of various types of trade in the Sunnah have been abrogated by this Quranic verse. However, the majority of scholars don't agree with him in that, and they say that because that verse is more general, the things which are more specific are still operative, and abrogation hasn't occurred.